Thank you, Dr. Barrett. The global financial crisis of the past 20 years has been rich in dark humor, and one of the classics was, if Lehman Brothers had been Lehman Sisters, could the whole financial crisis been averted? This punchline is often used as a shortcut to illustrate the lack of gender balance in modern corporate boardrooms. Management research has focused on introducing diversity as a known factor of performance innovation into the homogeneous corporate board environment. With women comprising roughly half the workforce, increasing women on boards as proxies for diversity writ large is a two-for-one approach that addresses both board composition and board performance. So how do you transform Lehman Brothers into Lehman Brothers and Sisters? How can government determine if public policy legislative action is necessary? And how important is culture in shaping the solution? The debate on gender imbalance in the boardroom is long-standing, and our progress described as glacial. It's been said in Canada, the conversation has been mistaken for the action. This is reflected in our global rankings. Compared to the US and the UK, we're below both by a wide margin, and we're ranked 30th out of 34 OECD countries. Singled out by the OECD for our high, over 40% of companies with no women on boards, current progress would take over 70 years to achieve parity. I viewed this as a complex public policy issue, and I looked to complexity theory, which when applied to management science, champions an emerging analytical approach focused on policy context, identifying patterns, and looking from within. Both Norway and Canada have over 45% of women in their workforce. In 2002, both had well under 10% of women on boards. A decade later, Norway has 40%, whereas Canada flatlines at 12%. What happened? Can Norway, the game changer, influence stuck-in-a-rut Canada? Canada has long been embarked on a process of voluntary actions and public debate on the issue. So had Norway. But in 2003, after a failed 3-year voluntary quota initiative, the Minister of Trade amended their Public Limited Companies Act, legislating a 40% quota for women on boards by 2008 or face sanctions. Through field interviews, I then drew a portrait of the Canadian corporate personality. What emerged was a competitive, performance, rule and control-oriented, benchmarking and shareholder-sensitive type, not the persona of an early adopter or an outlier activist. Business is just not in the business of being an agent of change, social or otherwise. It's not in their DNA. This explains why voluntary actions are necessary but not sufficient, and why legislative action is part of the solution. In addition, we can use this deeper understanding to identify solutions that work with and not against these traits. In 2003, to redress out-of-sync player-to-coach ratios, Pittsburgh Steelers owner Dan Rooney imposed an agreement on all NFL owners: interview minority candidates when hiring coaches or face sanctions. In 2006, that 6% had jumped to 22%. The Rooney Rule forced an outdated recruitment process to bring its view of playing field talent into sync with reality by mandating equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome. These 5 key insights, taken together with the lessons from Norway, where public debate, culture, voluntary and state actions together achieve change, lead to a made-in-Canada legislative approach that is more incremental than Norway's, gives a measure of control to business over the change process, and forces an outdated recruitment process to bring its view of the corporate playing field talent into sync with reality. Since Norway's game-changing actions, more than 26 countries have adopted legislation with more on the way. Complexity science led me to study context from within, leading in turn to innovative insights. Culture does trump strategy, and getting greater diversity in Canadian corporate boardrooms is a complex public policy challenge, requiring both voluntary and legislative approaches that are steeped in national debate and corporate culture in order to effectively move from words to actions. Thank you.
What's the sort of next steps that you're seeing happening, and how can the average person get in there and sing along in the chorus of like, this needs to happen, sort of thing?
Well, thanks for that question. Basically, as you can see, and I touched, we sort of go at top speed over all of this, but one of the focus of my research was to look at the intersection of the public policy legislative potential for action as an impact and change agent into the process currently in place. And that's why the Norway example which has really been a pioneer but has been out there now for 10 years, is so interesting. To contrast with Canada, which just hasn't gone beyond the voluntary and the public debate, which are absolutely essential because there's a cultural component to this kind of change. But, there have been some steps taken in Canada. There's a private member's bill at the Senate, or a private bill at the Senate level, that's been around for at least 6 years, which is almost there, almost symbolically, to keep the issue legislatively alive. And there is a lot of conversation, again, happening even within government, independent of who's currently there. It's been an issue for the minister in charge of women for some time, but they don't seem to be able to understand how to break the logjam. And what I wanted to do is not contribute another 100 pages to the over 350,000, because those numbers were in 2009. And, for example, I didn't mention Google Scholar, 25,000 web pages just on the issue, and over 500 published references. So there's just been far too much said and not enough done. I think looking at it from this angle allows you to really see and hopefully answer and push forward the fact that it's a multi-component solution, and legislative action, it's appropriate for it to play that role, answer that question so that they can take those steps, and how to do it and stay close to the corporate Canadian cultural personality so that they don't feel like they're being forced, which is a very different approach than the one in Norway, although they had given in Norway a chance for business to step up, and they didn't. I mean, they basically gave them 3 years, and the stats where they went from 4% to 7%, and then they had been put on notice. So there's this whole concept also that people act, surge under threat, and Sweden didn't have to get to legislation in order to have change. The other thing I'd close by saying that what's interesting, obviously, is to see what's happened in the 10 years since Norway. This is a growing trend, certainly in Europe. The European Union has just passed some legislation. So because when you think back to what I was saying about corporate personality writ large, they're bandwagon-oriented, trend-oriented, and so if everybody's doing it in a sort of a regulation plus voluntary action effect, that's the way it's going to go. Thank you.